I've never really viewed it as saving money. I view it as purchasing independence. And I don't view it as delayed gratification. I view it as pleasure right now. I think most wealthier people are not necessarily happier than less wealthy people, but I think they have fewer bad days. I think no matter how you're living, what people really value is a simple life, an uncomplicated life, because that is almost a prerequisite to independence.
People say that the money is the root of all evil, but really it's your feelings about money are the root of that evil inside of yourself.
Happiness is always, for everybody, a 5-minute emotion. Almost nobody is ever happy for more than 5 minutes. In a similar way that if you hear the funniest joke in the world, you don't laugh for 7 years, you laugh for 30 seconds. I think the emotion that you want to chase with money is not happiness, because you're never going to achieve that. It's contentment. It's getting to a point where you say, I'm good.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Morgan, I have so much enjoyed your books. Psychology of Money was almost a book about me on the bad side and then turning into me on the good side. Like I had to learn the hard way, the incredibly valuable lessons of that book. And for me, I'm not a big spender. So the art of spending money, I really appreciate the advice right from the beginning. I think it's incredibly valuable advice that everyone should follow. And, it seems like the crux of it is that you're saying a lot of people spend money based on what the perception they want others to have of them. Like, oh, I'm rich, so I have a yacht, or, and so on. And so it's almost like kind of trying to get people to admire and or be jealous of you. And that's the reason they spend money, as opposed to spending money on things that they actually need, like freedom and independence. Would that be a little bit of a summary?
Yeah, I think, James, that's a pretty good summary. What is hard about all these topics in money, whether it is investing or earning or saving or spending, is that almost nothing is universal. And so it is absolutely true that a lot of people, a lot of the time, use their money as a social signaling mechanism. It's not true for everybody, though. And it's not true for everybody all of the time. It's true for almost everybody at various points of time. And what's also true is that when we are using our money to socially signal, we almost always overestimate the admiration and attention that we're going to get from it. So it is one of the biggest kind of psychological traps and flaws that you can see people engaging with their money. I do this as well. I'm sure you've done it. It's a very human thing to do. I think life at its core is a competition for resources. That is kind of like the base of the pyramid, kind of like a hard thing to admit, but for a lot of things it is. A competition for attention, for jobs, for resources, for mates, whatever it might be. And so we are always engaging in some kind of signaling. And the material signaling, is like a relatively new way to do it, living in a world of kind of relative material abundance that didn't exist for most of human history. And I think because of that, we have a very flawed sense of what is going to do for us.
Yeah, I always think there's 3 skills of money. There's making it, keeping it, growing it. And each one of those skills requires a different type of psychology. Like making it, at least on an entrepreneurship level, requires this incredible grind, 24 hours a day, this, one focused thinking. But then keeping it is more about what you talk about in the psychology of money and the art of spending money. You have to understand, you have to value your independence. Like, I like how you put it in the art of spending money. You have to spend frivolously on your independence as opposed to on just objects that people are going to admire. And, growing it is a whole different thing, but that's maybe your next book. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it, James, is that I've always been a big saver for my whole life. It sounds like you have as well. But I've never really viewed it as saving money. I view it as purchasing independence. I view that if I save $100, I just bought a $100 independence claim check. That's really how I viewed it. And I also don't view it as delayed gratification. If I save $100 today, I'm $100 more independent today, and that gives me a good feeling today. I'm not delaying any kind of gratification with this. I love waking up with a sense of independence, that I can do whatever I want today, with whomever I want, for as long as I want, even if most days what I want to do is wake up and work, but I'm doing it on my terms. And also with the sense of recognizing and being cognizant of how fragile the world is to your individual life and for the broader world economy. and that life is just a continuous chain of surprises and setbacks and recessions and pandemics and bear markets. And the more savings you have, the more independent you are, the higher your ability to endure those setbacks. That gives me pleasure right now, today. And so I don't view it as saving money. I view it as purchasing independence. And I don't view it as delayed gratification. I view it as pleasure right now.
I think that is a great way to look at it. And honestly, I haven't looked at it that way in the past. I viewed saving money, often I viewed it as wasting money. But you're right, because like I think of times like in the year 2000, I would say I had a lot more money than I had in the year, let's call it 2010. So 10 years later. And yet I was much happier in 2010 than I was in the year 2000 because I wasn't spending nearly as much money. The idea of independence that's the only thing you could really put a value on in life, I feel. Because like you point out in The Art of Spending Money, not that many other things have a consistent static value. Like a yacht is maybe worth it to you the day you buy it, but then it's worth nothing to you a few months later. Whereas independence means you can wake up and do the things you want to do every day. That remains consistent.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of these too, it's not necessarily that a lot of these things that you purchase, whether it is a yacht or your independence, will give you a happiness per se. That's usually the wrong emotion that people are trying to chase. But it gives you a greater sense of contentment and calm. Here's one way to think about this. I think most wealthier people are not necessarily happier than less wealthy people, but I think they have fewer bad days. I don't think they have more good days. I think they have fewer bad days. And that is a lifestyle improvement. That is worth chasing. That is a great thing, but it's not necessarily happiness. Like most wealthy people do not wake up every morning grinning ear to ear, as you might assume when you are a poorer person anticipating what that life might be like. So the emotions that we can get from it are absolutely a lifestyle improvement. It's just maybe not exactly what you think it's going to be when you're dreaming about it. You brought up a very good point too. That first chapter of The Art of Spending Money, I called The Quest for the Simple Life, which it's the title of a book that was written in the early 1900s. And it makes this point that, you know, you can live an extravagant life. You can have the mansion and the yacht and the fancy cars, whatever you want to do. Everyone's different. Do your own thing. But I think no matter how you're living, what people really value is a simple life, an uncomplicated life, because that is almost a prerequisite to independence. It's hard to be independent if you have a very complicated life with a lot of moving parts. And Warren Buffett many, many years ago made this joke, as he often does. He makes kind of sexual, like inappropriate jokes. Someone asked him why he doesn't have a yacht. And he was like, well, if I get a yacht, I need a yacht boy. And then my wife might start, looking at the yacht boy. And it's like your life gets very complicated at that point. And so the book is not a plea to be super frugal. And I don't think that I am. My wife and I spend a fair amount of money on things that we really enjoy, most of which is independence, but a lot of material things as well. But no matter what kind of lifestyle you choose to live, the simple life is one that is an almost universal emotion that people want.
It's true. Although, like one time I had a period in my life for several years where I threw out all my belongings and I was just living out of one backpack. I had a rule. If it couldn't fit in my backpack, I didn't own it. And I didn't want to rent and I didn't want to own. So I lived from Airbnb to Airbnb. And I would say it was one of the happier times of my life. And it was a very simple life to some extent. But sometimes it's actually expensive to live a simple life.
Yeah.
Like having no belongings cost me money in a weird way, because Airbnbs cost money. Now, maybe I saved on furniture and maintenance and utilities and all that kind of stuff, but it's unclear whether I actually saved money having a simpler life, although it was pleasant. But actually spending less, living in a smaller place, living outside of a big city, so having more access to nature, which I did from 2010 to 2015, actually did give me joy, regardless of what my financial levels were at that time, which varied quite a bit during those 5 years.
Yeah. One other point that I think about here is there's a really good book written by Harvey Firestone, who started Firestone Tires in the early 1900s. He wrote his biography in, I think, 1926. So that's when this is dated. And he talks about every single rich person he knows. The first thing they do when they make a lot of money is they buy a gigantic mansion. They go out and buy a 30,000 square foot mansion. And he said every single one of them, without exceptions, views it as a giant pain in the ass. That's not how he phrased it, but that's the point of it, because it's so the upkeep on that and the staff that you need to keep that going makes your life very complicated. And then so he and his wife were daydreaming about when they were happier, when they used to live in a tiny little cottage. versus the big mansion that he now had. And he said, so why can't we go back? Of course we can go back to the small cottage. And he had a quote that I loved. He said, there is no going back except as a broken man. As in, like, he was sitting there in his big mansion. He realized that his simpler life was better, that he was happier back then, but you can't go back psychologically. Like, the house was a scorecard of what he had accomplished in life. And to go back to the small house meant that he was like giving up his trophy. And so one takeaway that I think about here with that is like, be very careful of the lifestyle that you pick, because by and large, people can only go one way. Now, what you've just talked about might be a counter to that, somewhat of an exception to that. Sounds like you had a bigger life and then you got very simple. But by and large, people do not like downgrades. The psychology of downgrading your lifestyle is vicious. It is very difficult for people to endure. And so all these people who chose the big life, the billionaire life back then, and looked back and said, my life is so complicated. I just wanted simplicity, but I can't go back. And that was always a very interesting anecdote to me.
Yeah, you point out in the book, he even mentions further that he says even Henry Ford got a big mansion, and Henry Ford's considered to be a very simple man. So, or had simple needs. But I think that was a good thing to mention in your book, because then it forces the reader, it forced me to think to myself, can I go backwards? Like, I live in a nice place right now. Would I be able to move into a studio apartment if I thought, oh, that was the years I was happiest, when I lived in a studio apartment? And I think the answer is no. I think you can't go back. It would be hard.
Right. It's very difficult. And I think what this gets down to is, are your possessions utility or status? Are they utility, like giving you utility in life, or are they status? And when I say status, I don't just mean it to signal to other people. A lot of status is internal. It's a reminder to yourself of what you've overcome. And so when I say status, you might think, I'm not trying to show off for other people. I don't care what anyone thinks of my house. They don't even see my condo. They don't even know. It's status for yourself, though. It is a scorecard in your own head of what you have accomplished. And if you go back to the smaller place, in your own head, it's like you don't have to care what anyone else thinks. In your own head, you feel like you've taken a step back, and that's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And well, this is related to both books, because the Psychology of Money deals a lot with this. And I have just a story that would be classic in your Psychology of Money, which is one time I was so anxious about losing money. And of course, when you have no money, you could be happy. I had no money my whole life. I was super happy, super driven. Then I got money and then I lost it. And of course, I was the worst misery of my entire life. And I was so anxious. I went to a psychiatrist and he's like, how can I help you? And I said, honestly, the only way you could help me is if you write me a check right now for $1 million. And he said, well, I honestly don't think that's going to help you. And of course, he was right. And that's the whole point of the Psychology of Money, that it's not money itself. It's something internal that's happening. People say that the money is the root of all evil, but really it's your feelings about money are the root of that evil inside of yourself. And how, other than reading your books and kind of really trying to incorporate your advice, how do you build up a good psychology of money and spending and so on?
I wish there was a simple formula that I could give you, or a simple 5-step program or whatever. I think for me, what's been most helpful is really trying to get on this therapist couch level of introspection. And to me, it was, who am I? Like, it's going to be different for everyone, but who do I, as Morgan, who am I trying to impress? Whose love and attention and admiration do I want in life? And when I ask that question, it's actually a very simple answer. It's like my wife, my 2 kids, my parents, and maybe 3 of my friends. There's a great Warren Buffett quote where he says, success in life is when the people who you want to love you do love you. And important there is like the people who you want to love you. I don't care or want the love and attention of strangers. And by the way, they're not even paying attention anyway, so why would I even admire that? I desperately want the attention of those 6 or 7 people that I just named. And the other common denominator of those 6 or 7 people is they could not care less about my material possessions at all. My net worth is higher now than it was 5 years ago. Do my kids love me more? No. Does my wife love me more? No. What they care about is that I'm a good husband, a good father. My friends care that I'm a good empathetic friend, that kind of thing. And so that was part of my relationship with money and getting healthier with it, was everybody can spend money in a way that's going to give them a better life. But when you really identify the things that are actually going to make you happy, your relationship, your health, your conscience, can you use money to leverage those things rather than what I think is far more common and almost the knee-jerk reaction for everyone, which was, get the attention and admiration of strangers with my house, my car, my clothes, my jewelry, whatever it might be, posting on Instagram, when you're trying to get the attention of strangers who aren't even paying attention. They're busy thinking about themselves. That was core to me. It was like asking the simple question. There's two ways to use money. One is as a tool to live a better life. The other is as a yardstick of status to measure yourself against others by. And with every dollar that I spend, just asking like, which one of those is it? Is it going to help this core desire that's going to actually give me a better life for my friends and family and my health and how much I sleep at night and that kind of thing? Or is it a signaling mechanism to people who are not paying attention? I think at the highest level, that was what helped me the most with my relationship.
Well, but was there ever a time where your psychology of money was unhealthy, where you didn't feel this way?
I don't know if I would call it unhealthy, but I definitely went through a lot of phases. I don't know if I called it unhealthy because it didn't seem to bother me that much. But when I look back, my desire for material possessions really peaked and it was very high in my late teens, early 20s. Let's call it 18 to 25. And that was when I was just, oh, I just want a Ferrari. I just want a Lamborghini. I just need the mansion. I just need the Rolex. And I didn't know this at the time, but looking back, it's very clear why I wanted that, which was I had nothing else to offer the world. I had no career. I had no intelligence. I had no humor. I didn't know how to be a good boyfriend, husband. I didn't have anything to offer anybody. And so I think naturally in that situation, you revert to people won't admire me for any of those attributes. Maybe they'll admire me for my car. And I think that was why I wanted it. I had nothing else to offer. And I think as I've aged and gotten a little bit more mature, now I seek my admiration and attention from those people by being a good husband, a good dad. And when you do that, my desire for the Ferrari fell. Now, if you like fancy cars, and I actually do, that's not a criticism, but for my personal life, I was like, my desire for status materialism is the inverse of what else I have to offer in the world. And so think of your favorite comedian, a person you just love. You can't stop laughing when you watch their special. If you learn that person was broke, or if that person, who they probably are, is wearing a dirty t-shirt when they present, you don't care. You value them for their humor. When your favorite athlete goes bankrupt, it's a gossip story, but you value them for being an athlete, not because of the car that they drove. So if you gain your respect and admiration through other more durable things, your desire for materialism tends to decline. I think that's very often true.
You know, but one durable thing is, like you described the athlete, you described the great comedian. There's also the great entrepreneur who has skill at making money. And so they're almost like the athletes of entrepreneurship, the ones who have been successful of it. And maybe I think a lot of entrepreneurs I know don't really care that much about material goods, but do care about creating something of lasting value. And the metric by which they judge that success is if they were rewarded with money.
Yeah, it's a much clearer scorecard of what they're doing there, where it's very imperfect, but stock price is a pretty loose proxy for the success of that business, in the same way that laughs is a good proxy for the success as a comedian. And so it is more tangible there, where it's like, I could probably think of exceptions of people who built amazing products, but the stock prices didn't reflect it. They didn't make a lot of money from it. There's probably some exceptions there, but it tends to be much more straightforward that yes, it's hard to be admired as an entrepreneur for those skills if you're not making any money doing it.
Yeah, I think part of my own unhealthy relationship in terms of the psychology of money is not that I don't think there's ever been a point in my life where I really wanted material goods, but I was so desperate for freedom and independence. I saw my parents go bankrupt and were poor, and they just always did things they hated. They never had independence or freedom. They were miserable. And I was so scared of that I had this incredible fear. Even after the more money I had, the more I was afraid I was going to lose my independence and freedom. And that feeling, of course, makes you lose your independence and freedom because you end up taking on too much risk and you lose it all. And so that was my unhealthy relationship with money. It wasn't a material goods thing. It wasn't even trying to get admiration thing. It was just trying to stay ahead of what I thought was this world trying to take this independence from me. And of course, it made me, again, take more risks and often lose the money until I realized this trap I was in.
I think what you described is not uncommon for people who've made some money. There was this is just in the last year or so, Steve Ballmer, who is one of the richest men in the world, is worth $150 billion now, former CEO of Microsoft. He gave an interview with the podcast Acquired. And he doesn't say this directly. He does not say this. So I'm kind of putting words in his mouth. but he kind of hints at the fact that he, worth $150 billion, worries about losing his money. He kind of like skirts around that topic a little bit. And I think it's not uncommon that even if you look at multi-billionaires, decabillionaires, centabillionaires, they worry about losing it. Sometimes it's rational because a lot of them have all of their net worth in one stock. So like the odds that they can lose it all is actually like not that small. But it's interesting that there seems to be no satiation where at X net worth, I'll stop worrying about losing it. And it's true that when you have nothing, you don't worry about losing. You have nothing to lose. So that thought's never in your head. And what you tell yourself is, if only my net worth was $1 million, $10 million, whatever, then I wouldn't have to worry anymore. But once you have $10 million, you're like, well, what about inflation? What about taxes? What if I make a stupid investment? What about leverage? You just exchange one worry for the next. And I think a lot of that is just whatever hole you were trying to fill with money is not being filled. And I think that's true in that situation, because there are people who do a very good job at saying, once my net worth is $1 million, that's all I'm going to need. And I'm totally content after that. Daniel Kahneman, the late psychologist, told the story that he went to his financial advisor. He was in his 70s at the time. And he said, I have no desire to earn any more money. I have no desire to see my net worth higher than it is right now. I just want to live comfortably on what I have. And the financial advisor told him, I can't work with you. And because to the financial advisor, it was like so antithetical that somebody would not want more money. And Kahneman was like, I don't think it's that rare, actually, that I'm perfectly content. I don't have this desire to just keep accumulating more. And so some people do a very good job doing it. But the people who don't are the ones who tell themselves, if only I had $1 million, my problems would go away. And then if they have $1 million or whatever their goal is, they might even feel worse because they were like frantically shoving money into the hole in their soul. And then once that hole was filled, they realized they had the same feeling. And I think in that situation, it's something else. The hole needs to be filled with something else. There's something else going on in your life, and money's obviously not the issue.
Right. And you provide so many stories and so many great pieces of advice in The Art of Spending and the prior book, The Psychology of Money. And the question I have is bridging that gap, like recognizing you have that hole in yourself, and then somehow, without ever having experienced true health before in terms of money, how do you cross that bridge so you are healthy? Is it a matter of reading and contemplating, the many stories and pieces of advice you give, or is there something else that someone could do or exercise to get that health?
One statement here that I think is very unfortunate. I wish I didn't have to make this statement, but everything that I've learned about money leads me to believe this is true. Most of your personality, and my personality, everyone's personality, is forged at conception. It's not learned in the real world. There is a part of it that is learned experience that you can kind of change your mind on. But some people are wired very differently than others. Of course, that's not a bold statement. And so I think a lot of people who have a lifelong issue with money or a lifelong non-issue with money, that is not a learned experience that you can really teach. That's just how they're wired. Charlie Munger stated this very starkly. He said, when you are teaching money matters to young people, they either understand it instantly or never. Those are the two time periods in which they get it. I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I do think around the edges, you can recognize the social games that get played with money, the desire for attention from strangers, the constantly ratcheting of expectations, the moving of the goalposts. You can recognize the games that are being played and become a little bit more cognizant of the forces that are around you. I have to do this with myself. Someone who I think I can say has done a pretty good job at keeping my expectations in check and saving and using money for independence. Not perfect, but I think I've done a decent job of that. Almost daily, I have to remind myself, because I'll get stuck in a trap of like, if only we had a bigger house. Oh, look at that car. If only I had that. Oh, look at his jacket. What if I had that jacket? And I have to remind myself, yes, some of those things are worth purchasing, and I do purchase, but I'm not going to get the attention that I assume. It is so common to assume that if I had that jacket, people would pay attention to me and say, ooh, look at Morgan. He's looking good. It's not how it works. It's almost never how it works. And by the way, that guy whose jacket I just saw, I don't care about him. I just care about his jacket. But I'd want his jacket because I then think people will care about me. It's like, don't you you have to constantly remind yourself of how stupid that game can be. And when you do, I think for me, it has pushed me closer towards, I want to use my money to help my immediate family and give myself independence and have some nice things that I have my quirky desires for. But I have to remind myself daily of the fact that I'm not going to get the attention that I intuitively assume I will.
Yeah. And you mentioned something in the book, something like, seeking the jealousy of others is like, or doing things that will you think will make people jealous of you is like outsourcing your critical thinking to other people. And
Mhm.
I thought that was a valuable quote. Like, you can't ever make decisions by outsourcing decision-making skills to other people who are not you.
So much of that is because you can't see a full holistic picture of their life. So if you are looking at somebody else, you can see their house, you can see their clothes, you can see their car. You cannot see their mental health by and large. You can't see their relationships. You can't see their physical health. You can't see how well they're sleeping at night. You can't see their conscience. All the things that actually create a good life, you are blind to. And so if you're looking at someone's material possessions and saying, they have a great life, I want that life. If only I had that, then I would be happy. You're seeing maybe 2% of what actually matters in their life. And you see that all the time, right? In the book, of the top 10 richest men in the world, there are a cumulative 15 divorces among the top 10. And so a group, and obviously it's a tiny sample size, you can't really draw any conclusions from that, but here are a group of men who are among the most admired men in the entire universe. And actually, if you dig not that deep into their life, you dig like one layer down into their life, there's a lot of things where it's like, no, that's actually a pretty shitty life. Like for a lot of them, they've been through some very hard times. And I think so you have to take the whole package. You have to get a holistic view of someone's life before you can like reasonably be jealous or envious or even have a sense of admiration of who they are.
Yeah, it's really true. And, but then, and I do like this idea, this exercise of really thinking about what makes you happy instead, and not putting money in there, because money is a tool for what makes you happy. And maybe you could say, I love going to sleep at night, not knowing I'm not in debt. So in that sense, money can make you happy. But thinking about the other things like living a simple life or doing a certain activity that you don't normally do, there's other things that, listing these things that make you happy, and then trying to decide, does having more money get me closer to these activities? I think that is a useful exercise for distinguishing between money and what actually makes you happy. So what should you spend your money on? Should it be freedom? Should it be some of these activities or experiences? Should it be accumulating more money? I think that helps sort of decide things a little better.
Yeah. I think for me personally, having a higher net worth than I did in previous years, a lot of what it's done for me is just a reduction of anxiety. And so, for example, 10 years ago, if my water heater blew out, I would have been devastated. It would have crushed me for a month. But now if it were to happen today, it's kind of like, oh, well, that's a shame. Let's go call the plumber and take whatever quote he gives us. And so that's just a reduction of anxiety. It's not happiness. It's not that, because the hot water heater broke, I'm happy, but it's a reduction of anxiety. And that's super important. That's what it's been for me. The other thing to that point is happiness is always for everybody a 5-minute emotion. You are like, almost nobody is ever happy for more than 5 minutes. In a similar way that if you hear the funniest joke in the world, you don't laugh for 7 years, you laugh for 30 seconds. Humor is a 30-second emotion, and happiness is very similar. It's always fleeting. So I think what people actually want when they daydream about having more money and what that life would be, what you are actually daydreaming about is contentment. You're imagining yourself in that bigger house with that fancy car, whatever it might be, and being perfectly content with those things. But what is more likely to occur for more people is that if they get in the bigger house, they are happy for about 5 minutes, and then they look across the street to their neighbors whose house is bigger, and they start being envious and dreaming of that. They're not content. And so I think the emotion that you want to chase with money is not happiness, because you're never going to achieve that. It's contentment. It's getting to a point where you say, I'm good. I have everything I want. I have the independence I want. I can spend the time with the people who I want. That's what you're going for. It's not necessarily happiness, though.
In terms of like you mentioned a lot about savings, and I'm not the same type of saver you are, as I can gather from your books. Like, for instance, when people are in their 20s, I think it's always important to have some amount saved just in case of worst case scenarios, like a parent gets sick, you have to take care of them, you lose a job, whatever. But at some point, because the earning power of someone in their 20s is going to go up so much higher than inflation, not in all cases, but in many cases, saving an extra $100 a month when you're 23 years old is sort of inconsequential. If you already have like 6 months of runway set aside, I don't think a young person really needs more than that, because, by the way, that 6 months runway you might make in 2 weeks when you're 35 or 45. So
Yeah.
I don't know. And I understand the compounding miracle. Like, I get it. And also, By the way, in The Art of Spending Money, I appreciate your comments about how time compounds also, which is a very important discussion. But I think saving, I don't know, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. I think savings in your very early 20s when you're first starting your career is not as important as later on.
I could come down on either side of this. I think I could argue both sides of this with equal confidence. So I don't know really where I come down on this, but I agree. I was thinking about this the other day that when I was 19, if I saved $100, that was a heroic feat. Like $100 when you're 19 is a lot of money. And
Yeah.
I invested that money. So let's say today, I don't know what the math is. Let's say today that's worth $500, which doesn't mean a lot to me. And so could I have had an amazing night out when I was 19 with my friends for that $100, or invested it into an amount of money that means nothing to me today? That's kind of a weird way to put it. But here's where I could take the other side. It is very difficult to live paycheck to paycheck and go into debt and have a YOLO mentality in your 20s and then flip a switch in your 30s and say, now I'm going to become a big saver. Very difficult to actually make that transition. And I think it's difficult to have good saving habits in your 30s and 40s unless you start them in your 20s. I think that's probably true for most people. So I see both sides of that equation. It's funny you bring this up because I was literally thinking about it last night. The $100 when I was 19 is $500, which means nothing to me today. I was thinking about that last night. But I also think if I didn't do that at 19, I would not have the saving habits today in my 40s that I think have made a big difference in my life.
I think that's an excellent point, and that could potentially change my mind about this. Like you sort of make that point in The Art of Spending when you say, don't view it as savings, view it as spending on future independence or spending on independence now. So if you have that satisfied feeling that $100 of savings that month is going to create this enormous independence for you in the future, then that could feel very pleasurable and give you this feeling of contentment that what could be better anyway. So, the book started to make it understandable to me, and what you just said also makes it understandable to me. I could see both sides of it now as well. I just have known that in the past when young people ask me for advice, I always say after you have that, and I say this to my kids, after you have that first 6 months, they're in their 20s. So if I say to them, if you have that first 6 months, if you have 6 months of savings so that you could do nothing for 6 months, that's good enough. And then just focus on improving your skills, being good at what you do. And I'm not saying go out and party all the time. I don't necessarily encourage them to strain their life by saving an extra dollar or two when they're living in New York City, which is already expensive and a hard place to live and so on.
Yeah, no, I definitely do not disagree with that. I think that's wise advice that you give to people. The other part of this I've thought about is for a lot of people when they're adults, if you ask them, what are some of your greatest memories in life? Not everybody, but a lot of people will tell you high school and college. And again, not everyone, but a lot of people will be like, oh, it's so fun. We went to parties or hung out. We went to the lake. We stayed up till 3 a.m. And one common denominator of those years is most people have no money. And so the idea that you need to spend a lot of money to have great experiences, which is kind of tied into that point you just said, I think is almost usually the opposite. That in your 40s, when you probably are making more money than you ever have, is when people's lives tend to be more common that their lives are very monotonous and they're not doing that much. And in your late teens, that tends to be when you have no money and every day is an awesome adventure with you and your friends. So it's not really black and white that like in your 20s, you should go spend money and have these experiences. You're probably going to have awesome experiences anyway, because you're probably not married. You probably don't have kids. You can probably jump around from city to city, and that's awesome. When I look back at my 20s, which were not perfect, I would do things differently. So I'm not saying that this is a template. I was a hyper saver. That's probably the right word. And I have endless memories of places I went. I lived in 7 different cities and worked at tons of different companies and met tons of awesome people. And so I don't necessarily view it as sacrificing experiences. It was the experiences came because of the phase of life I was in, not because of the money I was or was not spending.
Yeah. And also, and I think of this in my mid to late 20s. I had no money, but super happy, great experiences. But it's also because those great experiences were hard to have. I had to earn those experiences in ways other than spending for them because I had no money.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you prize the things that you had to work hard for. Whereas if it's easy to buy something, it's not that interesting.
Yeah, I think that's really true. If you don't know how to budget and and everything is at your disposal, you can have anything you want. If you can have anything you want, you won't value any of it. In the same way that most people have all the oxygen they could ever want, and you don't really think about it. You don't value it that much. Or maybe a more pertinent example, you and I can go get penicillin right now, for $2 or whatever it costs. Like it's dirt cheap drugs, and completely change our life, save our lives, maybe save our lives multiple times over the course of our life. But we don't think that much of it because it's by and large available to everyone for dirt cheap. And so there are things where they are incredibly life changing, but if you don't have to economize for them, you don't value them as much as you otherwise would.
Maybe that's a way of, and I've been wondering throughout all of this, like, how does one build this mindset so one is more psychologically healthy around money and spending and so on? You know, maybe imagining one exercise I try to do is imagining I'm from, let's say, some other planet, and I'm in this body for like the day. I wake up thinking I'm in this body for the day. So whether James Altucher, in quotes, is up in the stock market or down in the stock market that day, it doesn't matter. I have this opportunity right now to build from here rather than say where I was from or what I'm striving for. I could just simply build right here, right now, and that will give me pleasure for the day. And what an opportunity it is to start from wherever it is I'm starting, whether it's down or not, it doesn't matter. So kind of trying to reframe where one is at in life versus some ideal dream you've built up. Like, I need this boat, I need this house, I need this stock to be at 6,000 instead of 5,000 or whatever.
Yeah, like wiping yourself clean of all of your past expectations, and also wiping yourself clean of the identities that you've built up over the years. A lot of people have financial identities. They might say, I am a saver, I am an investor, I'm a value investor, I'm a crypto investor, whatever it might be. Anytime in life where you say, I am a blank, no matter what that blank is, you've assigned yourself to a tribal identity. And it's very difficult to detach yourself from that once you have attached yourself to it. You see this a lot in politics, where if someone says, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, their ability to think independently is completely out the window at that point. By and large, that tends to be the case. They've assigned themselves to a tribe, and then you've outsourced your critical thinking to the tribe. And I think that's true for a lot of money habits as well. If you talk to a lot of financial advisors, they'll tell you one of the biggest problems that they face are people who have saved enough for retirement. People have been diligent savers. Now they're 65, they have $2 million in their IRA, and they can go live a great life, and they cannot bring themselves to spend it because their entire life, their financial identity has been, I'm a saver, and my net worth goes up every year. And they can't bring themselves to drawing it down because it's antithetical to their identity, to the tribe that they've assigned themselves to.
I imagine that could be difficult. Like, what are you going to do when you reach that tipping point where the years ahead are not as great as the years before? As a hyper saver, how are you going to reconcile with, oh, my net worth might go down every year?
I don't know. And I think anyone would be foolish to think that they can look ahead and know exactly what that's going to be. People don't have any sympathy or pity for these people, but a lot of times where you see very poor mental health are on former professional athletes, because there was a period of time, usually in their early 20s, when they were literal superheroes, making millions of dollars a year, everyone lining up for their autograph, literally like the coolest people in the world. And then at age 40, they're kind of nobodies. Unless they're like Michael Jordan or someone and they remain famous forever. Most of them are unknown. And maybe they're high school football coaches, great people. Maybe they're good spouses, pillars of their community. But the identity that they used to have breaks, and it breaks in a profound way. And that can be absolutely crushing. I saw my dad go through this. He was a doctor and he retired. It was like his dream to retire. He was exhausted. And 6 months later, I think it bothered him that when he looked in the mirror, he could no longer say, I'm a doctor. That was his identity. So he went back to work. And I think a lot of people are unaware of the identities that they've assigned to themselves. And so in your little daydream of being the alien, it feels good to, for at least for a day, wipe yourself clear, like wipe the slate clear and be like, if I have no expectations and no identity, who would I want to be today? And only in that moment do you really recognize the identities that you've tied yourself to.
It's hard though, because like, as you mentioned earlier, we're tribal animals. Like, we've been that way for millions of years. Before there were Homo sapiens, primates are tribal animals. And, like, I was a day trader in the early 2000s, and how much money I was up or down on the month, week, year, whatever, that was my identity and my job. And you can't really get away from that. So what I would try to do is I would try to diversify tribes. So if I had a bad day in the market, I would go to Yahoo Games and play chess and try to win, and just diversify things that I loved that had nothing to do with each other. If I'm bad at one that day, I could be maybe good at another that day.
Yeah, I like that idea. There's a great quote from Paul Graham, the investor, and he says, keep your identity small. Very simple quote, but that's real. Like, be very careful what you tie your identity to. I was talking to Tim Ferriss about this a couple years ago, and I asked him, I said, Tim, if you go back to 2008, everybody, the world knew Tim Ferriss, the author. That's who he was, Tim Ferriss, the author. And if you go to today, if you ask people who's Tim Ferriss, he's the podcaster. Like, that's actually a pretty profound jump. Those are very different things, writing versus podcasting. And I asked him, like, did you used to have this identity of Tim Ferriss, the author? When you look back at your career, now you're Tim Ferriss, the pod. Like, does it bother you? And like, he didn't really seem to have any issue with making that jump. But I think it's actually a pretty rare thing that you can detach from who you used to be and become somebody completely different. Like, a very extreme example of that is Will Smith, who was like rapper and then actor, very, very different things at very different points in his life. It's rare that people make that transition and can break off from who they used to be and can become somebody completely different. I think you have had periods of that in your life. You've been a day trader, an investor, a podcaster. You've done many different facets of it. I'm curious, like, I'll pose the question to you. When you became a different person in your career, especially someone that has a public face that people know, and now you're doing something different, did that impact the person you saw in the mirror? Like, did it bother you when you became somebody else different?
Very rarely, because I almost always have a rule that, or not a rule. It's not a rule. I'm only able to do things I'm obsessed with. So I'm only, like, for instance, I wouldn't do this podcast if I wasn't just in love with podcasting and talking to people and learning from people and so on. Like, I've been obsessed with this for 10 years. Investing, I only was really a professional investor when I was obsessed with investing. And I've had on and off periods of that. And, I actually was a stand-up comedian for 6 years because I was obsessed with it. I would watch comedy videos all day and then perform at night, and I was obsessed. And then once I was not obsessed anymore, I stopped doing it, and I didn't care. When I did it, I was very much obsessed with the hierarchy of it. Once I stopped being obsessed, I didn't care at all about it. But one way this has affected me lately is from 2004 to 2021, I wrote literally 1 or 2 books a year. So I wrote 3,000 words a day. I read every day. I read an enormous amount every day. I was obsessed. That's all I would do all day, was reading and writing for most of those periods. And since 2021, I have not written a book for various reasons. And that has bothered me, that people might not know me. Like, when you listen to things I've done in the past, I've done many things, but the one thing you didn't list was writer. And that rung in my head, because that is the one thing that, where I still love it, I haven't done it, and it's starting to bother me that I've identified so much with I am a writer that I am starting to feel anxiety of not writing as much these days. But
Yeah. I'm curious though. If I said, James, you have to write a book tomorrow, you have to start writing a book tomorrow, do you think you could do it at the level and the skill that you did when you were in your peak, in your frantic writing days?
I don't know. I think actually my skills are better, because it's like a normal thing and I'm sure this happens to you, when you look back at something you wrote 10 years ago, you think, oh my God, that's crap. I could do so much better now. But at the same time, I don't know if I have the focus to do it right now, whereas I always had that focus earlier.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. It's just something I'm going through, but I tell people there's things I'm writing, but I just am not able to finish them. So I don't know the answer.
I think what bothers a lot of people with losing identity is looking in the mirror and saying, I can't be that person I wasn't. Like, that person used to be really good. Back to the athletes, why it can be so devastating. If you look back at yourself when you were 22 and you were an NFL player and you were so incredibly good, and now you're 45 and your body's broken, that's a very difficult thing to come to terms with. It's not that I used to be a different person. It's that I can't be the person I used to be. That can be very difficult. I think that's a big part of your tribal identity. The other part is like the sunk cost fallacy. If you put a lot of effort into forming an identity, it's very difficult to tell yourself that actually it was wrong. You see that in politics a lot. People will spend a lifetime building their political identity of whichever side they're on. And then even if they are exposed to conflicting information, your propensity to reject that conflicting information is very high, because you're like, I spent a lifetime of debate and critical thinking to form this identity, and it's going to be very difficult for me to break it down.
I always wonder about that, like these, congressmen or senators or governors who then lose an election, and there's really nothing else for them to do in politics, and they have to go back to some other life that they had before. Like, how they're able to deal with that. You don't really hear a lot of stories about that, like, what they do for the next 40 years of their lives. But
Yeah.
it is interesting because we're not meant, people always ask, should you focus on one thing in your teens and early 20s and just do that for the rest of your life? Because the law of compounding works there. But it's very hard to do that. And often, as David Epstein talks about in his book Range, often it's good to do a diverse amount of things. And then you're sort of the best in the world at the intersection of all that. And there's some pleasure in that as well. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's an unknown. I go through this because I always think, oh, what if I had, instead of having all these different obsessions, what if I had just done one thing from the beginning, focused on that the whole time, and I would be the best in the world at that one thing? Because that has to be a pleasure to be the best in the world at something. But as you
Yeah.
point out, it ends, no matter what, it ends eventually.
Right. I have conflicting thoughts about this. I don't mean to pass judgment on people, but I always kind of wince when someone will say, I'm a 12-time entrepreneur. I founded 12 companies. I'm like, is that good? Like, it sounds like you've never stuck with anything. Sounds like you start something and immediately abandon it and move on to the next thing. And I really admire people, and this is subjective, like people might disagree with this, but I really admire people who've done the same thing for 50 years. Like a professor who's like, I've taught at Harvard for 50 years. I've worked at this company for 50 years. I'm like, God, the compounded memories, the compounded skills, the compounded institutional knowledge is unbelievable in that situation versus a person who's jumping around from job to job. I can also see the David Epstein point of, particularly when you're young, you have to try a million things to find your thing. And maybe it's just people who are blessed to find their thing early on that they can stick with for 50 years. Like that's the exception to the rule versus the people who need to jump around to it. I think I got very lucky, haphazardly stumbled into financial writing. Was not the plan, was not the dream, was not the goal. Haphazardly stumbled into it and realized that I enjoyed it. And that's all I've done ever since. I've never had any other professional job other than writing about money. But I could easily see that if I went down a different route, if I tried to become a hedge fund manager or trader, whatever it would be, that I would have had to jump around to different things before I found something that actually fed my soul.
Yeah, and I guess it goes both ways. Like, let's say at the end of a life, the value you bring to future generations is your wisdom that you've accumulated over the years. And if you're a Nobel Prize winner of physics because you've spent 50 years doing physics, obviously you can inspire a generation of young physicists about which directions to go. When is it time to give up one direction and pursue another field, and on and on. But let's say you've lived in 100 different countries instead of one, and you've immersed yourself in the culture of 100 different countries or 12 different countries instead of just one. That's a different kind of wisdom that you're able
Yeah.
to impart on future generations. So, I think it's Arthur Brooks who talks about this, that the brain changes as we get older. So even if you do just love one thing, like let's say when you're younger and you're writing about finance, maybe you're writing about very specific things like the benefits of 401ks or stocks, or this stock's good, this stock's bad. But then as you get older, your brain's just not going to be as good at that perhaps. And maybe it's going to be better at like what you're doing. Like, oh no, money is more about the psychology. And here, if you really want to be, accumulate a lot and then be happy with what you've accumulated, you have to approach it. So that style, you're still writing about finance and writing about money, but I'm not saying this is what you've done, but the context of it changes a little between youth and older age.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. I almost feel like this is not a fully hashed out thought, so I might rethink this through. But I almost feel like it should be one end of the barbell. That I think there could be a lot of value to having lived in 50 cities throughout your life. That can impart a lot of wisdom on you. I think there's a lot of value in having lived in the same house in the same city for 50 years too. Like both ends of the barbell can teach you incredible things about the world, about diversity in different cultures, about the value of compounding. We had this experience in the last year, my wife and I. We bought a new house a year ago. This house bought 12 months ago. By any metric, this house is an upgrade from our previous house. But in the previous house, we had so many cool memories. Our kids took their first step, Christmas morning when they still believed in Santa, first day of kindergarten, all these memories that we just walked away from. And that hurt. That it was so hard for me to deal with that, to be like, I'm such a firm believer and writer about the value of compounding. And I just slammed the door on those compounded memories. Now, of course, I still have the memories, but I would have loved where the spot in the house at the bottom of the stairs where my daughter took her first steps, I would have loved to see that location when she was 40 years old, and remember the path. So I think you can contextualize life very well when you have compounded memories. And it pained me a little bit that I slammed the door shut on that compounding.
But how can you reframe that so you still are compounding from that?
Well, obviously she's still my daughter. He's still my son. I still get to see that. But, I think, and we knew at the time when we sold the house and bought this one, we knew, and I was very cognizant of this is breaking kind of a long held dream of mine, which other people that might disagree with, but I would love to live in the same house for 50 years. I think that's awesome. Even if other people disagree with it, I think it'd be really cool. And I had to start the process over. And I think that's okay. Hopefully this is the house that we'll live in for 50 years now. Hopefully we won't change our mind again. But I knew it was a problem, but I think it actually turned out to be a bigger problem than I thought it would be. And I value that more than anything now. Like my personalities, I want to be the kind of person that has the same friends for life, lives in the same area for life, has the same wife for life, lives in the same house for life. I value that compounding of memories because I think memories compound faster and more durably than money can compound. Everyone knows how powerful compound interest in money can be. Compound interest with memories, I think, is even grander. And I heard this interview recently with an elderly woman. She was in her 90s. And she said one of the benefits of growing old is that you get to time travel in your head. So she, as someone in her 90s, she could be like, oh, remember what the world was like in the 1960s? Like what music was like in the 1940s? You get to time travel in your head. So I think those compounded memories are a huge value of life.
That makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense when you live in the same house the whole time. I think the memories, I'll be honest, even if this hurts you a little bit, I do think the memories compound better when you're in the same location because you're physically confronted with them. I don't have that experience with a house, but for instance, New York City, every intersection in all of Manhattan, I could walk in and I could walk on that intersection and be flooded with every memory that has ever happened to me on that exact intersection. And I've been everywhere in Manhattan. I've actually lived everywhere in Manhattan. So I've probably been on every intersection many times. And I remember it. It's like physically, it's like almost watching a movie. I walk onto an intersection and I'm watching like 20 different movies at the same time of every memory I've had there. Whereas when I'm outside of New York City, I might not remember any of those things. And maybe I'll never remember those things again because I won't have a reason to.
I think this is a very individualistic thing. My wife couldn't care less about the memories in our old house. She's like, what? They're like, we have pictures and the house is just a pile of lumber. Like, who cares? People are affected very differently by this.
So I have an extreme, whereas, so in the past 10 years, I've probably lived in 100 different locations because I went through my Airbnb phase over these 10 years. But like right now on a trip and I'm about 3 or 4 miles from Stonehenge. So I'm in England and I'm staying in a house where this family who owns this house, they first bought it in the early 1800s and generation after generation, they've lived here ever since. And it's complete. The landscape is empty. Like there's just miles of land. There's no one else around. And it must have been just such a nice, simple life for the kids. Like this is all they know is generations of family living here, growing up here in this incredibly simple atmosphere and place. And I appreciate the differences and almost could be jealous, like, oh, what would my life have been like if I had that simplicity? But you never know really. So there's the benefits of all of it.
Yeah. And they might be looking at you and be like, oh, you're so lucky to live in the big city filled with opportunity and culture and nightlife. So like, I think what a lot of people get joy and pleasure out of is just contrast. If you live 3 miles from Stonehenge, you probably daydream about Manhattan. Maybe. If you live in Manhattan, you dream about living in the quiet, beautiful, peaceful country. A lot of it is just people want change. They desire change from their daily routine. They want to escape from what they already know and experience something different.
See, and it's funny because I actually think they look at me and hate me because I didn't live the life they've lived and I admire their life. So I don't know, but this is your point where you can't outsource your thinking about yourself to what other people think about you because that goes down a dangerous road. But it is interesting though how this all ties back to our relationship with money, that, how you spend your money. Like, should you go live the simple life? Should you save for the expensive things? What is independence and freedom? Like when we're talking about independence, and there's always new things to worry about. Like what if inflation eats away at my independence when I thought I saved enough? What if there's a war and the dollar is not worth as much? And, this is why you see these billionaires who are trying to constantly escape the feeling of nothing. They'll build the bunkers in New Zealand. They'll fund billions of dollars worth of anti-aging medicines. They'll invest in so many obscure, ludicrous things just in case their company or investments go away. And I think it's so hard to get out of that psychology to
Yeah.
really feel contentment.
So much of independence too is about the independence of thought and the independence of voice. So I won't say any names, but everybody knows some extremely wealthy billionaires who have all the money they could ever need, but they have to spend a lot of their time on their knees groveling to politicians and regulators. Is that independent? If you're worth $100 billion, but you have to say things that you know are not true to politicians in order to get a law change that's going to benefit, is that really independence? Like, not really. And so I think it's more than financial independence. It's psychological, philosophical independence of being who you want. I think one person who has done this very, very well, two people, let's say, Nassim Taleb and Naval, are two people who, I think both have financial independence, but they both just say whatever the hell they want. They are not concerned with pissing anybody
both have been
off.
on this podcast too, like, and I like both of them, but it's very
Yeah.
true. Naval even more than Nassim. Nassim, I see getting into these almost obscene arguments on Twitter, and I'm like, why? I asked him, why do you have to argue with everybody on Twitter? Like, it's really, you get into these really, and he says, oh, it's just fun, it's just exercise. So I don't know.
And see, I think I the same thing, but like with Taleb, but I think he enjoys doing it. We can talk
Yeah.
about why he enjoys doing it, and you and I would not enjoy doing it, but he is not concerned at all with what anybody says about him. Charlie Munger was the same. People criticized him left and right for what he said. He could not give two shits what you said about him, and that's true independence.
Yeah, and I think Naval is like that too. Like, Naval has a real wisdom to him that's valuable to listen to. I almost cannot think of anything he's ever said to me or that I've read that he said that I didn't think was incredibly smart. So
See, with Naval, there is a handful of things that he said that I disagree with, but then I'm like, that's the point. He says things that people disagree with no fear of repercussion. That the fact that I disagree is what's great about it. And then, but there are also people who are worth $100 billion who will never say anything disagreeable because they're terrified of the repercussions it's going to cause. That is not independence.
well, when you were saying that, I'm sure we're thinking of the same image. Like, and this is all politics aside. Like, I don't care about the politics of it. But at Trump's inauguration, you see all these billionaires sitting right behind him in the inauguration, and clearly they're all there, whether they wanted to be or not. They're all there because they want to have favor with the guy who's going to be influencing the laws that will affect their companies. There's this hot mic moment where Zuckerberg says, I said 600 billion. What number should I have said? Like, so here's a guy worth $200 billion who's like worried. And it struck me that I wouldn't want to be that way. Again, this is politics. I'm not talking about his politics. I wouldn't want to curry anyone's favor. Not that I would want people to hate me. I'd still want people to like me, but I wouldn't want to have to curry favor if I had $200 billion. I hate currying favor no matter what.
I'm the same way. You could, if there is a devil's advocate here, and that's what it is, because I don't know if I believe what I'm about to say, but I think you could say that those politicians at the inauguration are not groveling. They're just smart. They're smart business people who are just know how to get things done. I think Trump made this comment many years ago when people pointed out that he once donated money to Hillary Clinton's campaign in the early 2000s. And he was like, yeah, I made friends with everybody. That's why, I'm a good businessman. I want to be everyone's best friend. And so is it groveling or is it just knowing how to get things done? I would never want to be the person who needs to sacrifice my morals for getting something done, particularly like a financial benefit. But you could look at those people and could make an argument that they are just very shrewd at getting what they want. And there is one definition of wisdom, or the definition of intelligence, I should say, which is intelligence is getting what you want. And they're very good at getting what they want, even if they have to sacrifice their morals to get there.
And you could also argue that they love what they're doing. Like you mentioned in your book that, Mark Zuckerberg in 2006 was offered $1 billion by Yahoo or Yahoo offered $1 billion for Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg would have walked away with 250 million. And the question is, he was 24 years old. He could have walked away with 250 million right then. And why did he refuse it? And so I asked Peter Thiel, who was on the board of Facebook at the time, and Peter Thiel said, we were all hoping he wanted to take it. For us, it was big returns too. Mark Zuckerberg said, look, what am I going to do with $250 million? I'm just going to start a social network and try to make it popular. Well, I've already got that, so I'm just going to keep doing it. And,
Right.
That's certain kind of wisdom as well, to really recognize what things, it's like what you were saying earlier, write down the things that make you happy that money can't really buy. Like he already had he was already doing what had made him happy. So he didn't need more money to do it.
The vast majority of those extremely successful people, it's probably the wrong thing to say they like what they do. It's probably closer to say they have to do it. It is just so fundamental to their personality that they have to do it. Does Elon Musk wake up every morning happy? I think the answer is absolutely not. I think he wakes up every morning terrified that he has not accomplished X, Y, and Z, that he needs to build X, Y, and Z. And there's a long list of problems that need to be fixed, but he has to do that. I don't think he can live in a world which he just retires to some mansion and wakes up and goes for a walk and reads the newspaper. He can't do that. I would love that. That is consistent with my personality. It's absolutely not consistent to theirs. And that's why they're so successful.
But let me ask you, like, you sell millions of copies of your books. You have 500,000 followers on Twitter. So you know when you say things, a lot of people are going to listen. Most people are going to agree. It's seldom you're going to have fights within your feed where most people aren't taking your side and defending your words. You know, when you write a new book like this book, The Art of Spending, people are going to buy it, and there's going to be mostly or hopefully, favorable comments on it. I think there will be. If you didn't have that, it's almost like this backstop on your opinions. You know what things you say are going to be heard and listened to. If that was all wiped to zero, do you think that would, affect you emotionally? Obviously, it would affect a little, but like how much?
I think I've been maybe unique as a writer in that I always say I write for an audience of one, which is me. I write things that I'm interested in. I try to solve problems that I have in my own life. I try to write stories in a voice that I find appealing. And if someone else finds them appealing too, awesome. But a lot of people won't. And that's okay. I don't want to pander to any specific audience. So when I write, I almost think that I'm writing a diary, like a journal just for myself. And I really go out of my way, at least most of the time, to not read any of the comments. I think you cannot take the praise seriously unless you take the criticism seriously as well. You can't read the praise and say, I'm so great, and then read the criticism and say, they're trolls. You have to take nothing or everything. And most of the time, I take nothing. I write for an audience of one, and I just leave it be. And I know, particularly if you sell a lot of copies, even if 1% of people hate it, and it's probably more than that, but 1% of 10 million copies is a lot of people who are going to tell you how terrible and stupid you are. So if you spend your time digging through those comments, you're going to find a lot of hate. And of course, it's going to hurt. So I guess to answer your question, I don't know if it would impact me that much because I don't spend that much time looking at it to begin with.
Well, that's good. I think that's very healthy. I feel I have spent an undue amount of time building up followers, and now I don't, but for a period of time, it was very important to me. Like every day was I going up? Was I going down? Did I get more readers? Did this book sell more copies and so on? I think books like yours really provide a valuable guide to at least cause people to think and avoid certain problems that often happen, like accumulating a lot of money and then going broke, or just accumulating money to begin with. I think having a good psychology about it, like as in the psychology of money or the art of spending, I think these things are incredibly important. And you've written great books. I've been inspired by them. I've learned from them. And it's also helped me not only learn for the future, but understand certain things that happened in my past a little better. I found your books incredibly valuable for that as well, so I don't make the same mistakes. And so thank you for that, Morgan Housel. I've tried for years to have you on my podcast. I'm so glad you had time to come on today. And again, The Art of Spending Money, Simple Choices for a Richer Life. People should definitely buy it. I was riveted to it. And you always write good books that I could read in a day also, which I appreciate.
Awesome. James, I followed you for probably decades now. I was going to say years, but I'm sure it's decades now too. And I've always admired your skill as a writer. I am a keen observer of good writing. And I think your ability to craft a sentence and turn a phrase and tell a narrative is wonderful. So I really appreciate you having me on. It's been an honor to come on. And I've followed you for many years as well.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Well, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks, James.